What if Bella and Edward separated? Episode 2. The following week, Edward and I sat in Jasper and Alice's living room after having one last dinner with his family. It was an emotional night, with tears freely flowing even by Rosalie, and he'd felt the need to come to one place he'd found the most calming, almost a sanctuary, in the passing days there on the couch, holding Sarah-Lynn. Gone was the man from the week before, that even the thought of holding the newborn was a terrifying one. In his place was the man who sat beside me at that moment, whispering softly to the baby in his arms, and completely oblivious to the room around him. And while it was a relief to see him so at ease with her, I was also anxious for some time with him as well before he left the next day, knowing I probably wouldn't see him again until Christmas. I stood to leave the room, giving him a moment alone with Sarah-Lynn and joining Alice in the kitchen only to find her sniffling. "You okay?" "Yeah, just stupid shifting hormones," Alice replied with a dismissive wave, turning back to making the bottle for the baby as more tears fell. "I'll never understand how you do this, Bella. Just the thought of him not being around here feels so weird, doesn't it?" I dabbed the corner of my eye with my fingertip and nodded, sitting down at the table. "Yeah, it does, but I know I'll see him again soon, and hopefully before too long, I won't be so far away from him, and I'll never have to do this again. And maybe you guys can come visit once in a while." "Have you told him yet?" Alice asked in a whisper, lowering herself into the chair across from me, and I shook my head. "Bella, you need to tell him." "I know," I groaned, burying my hands in my hair and leaning forward on my elbows. "I've tried, but this week has just been so crazy, you know, with him getting ready to leave again and everything that happened with Jessica. There just hasn't been much of an opportunity to just sit down and talk." "I can't believe that girl was that damn stupid," Alice quipped, rolling her eyes. "Running away with James of all people, and thinking she wouldn't get caught trying to cross the border. She's only 17, for crying out loud." "Well, kidnapping charges will definitely serve him right," I added, but she resumed her pointed stare at me. "I will, it's just that, you know, he wasn't exactly thrilled about the idea before. You know, missing out on normal high school experiences and all that. It would just be so much easier if I knew he'd be okay with it." "Bella, you know Edward. He's ridiculously stubborn at times," she said, taking my hand across the table, and I rolled my eyes. "But he's not completely illogical either. This is the only way the two of you will be able to be together anytime soon. And it's not like you're dropping out to run off to Maryland. And call me crazy, but I think Sarah-Lynn has made him rethink a lot." As if on cue, the baby's cry echoed out from the next room, and Alice grabbed the bottle from the shelf, hurrying out of the kitchen. I followed out a few seconds later, watching Edward place Sarah-Lynn in Alice's arms and gently kiss the baby's head. "I'll see you soon, baby girl," he whispered, and then gave Alice a brief hug and shook Jasper's hand, saying goodbye before turning to take mine. "Ready?" I nodded and told Alice that I'd call her the next day. As I made my way out the door with Edward, an hour later, we were sitting on my couch, his arms around me and holding me against him silently. He suddenly drew in a deep breath, running his hand along my arm. I really didn't want to give her up tonight. I tilted my face up to look at him to see his eyes closed, and his head rested back against the couch. I kissed his jaw and slid my arm around his waist more, and his hold around me tightened as well. "You'll see her for Christmas, and she won't remember who the hell I am," he replied with a sigh, his eyes opening and locking on the ceiling. "Leaving you behind is hard, but I know that no matter what, you won't forget me." "But her, she's only a week old and..." Edward's words trailed off, and his gaze shifted to me as I placed my hand on his cheek. "And she's surrounded by people who love her, and you. No one will let her forget you." My lips rose to meet his and his fingers threaded in my hair, his other arm lifting me to sit across his lap. As he kissed me passionately, my conversation with Alice earlier in the evening filled my mind, and I slid my fingers between our lips, parting mine from his to gaze at him. "Edward, we need to talk." And there's the four singular words that instantly strike fear into the heart of any man, he whispered with a sigh, opening his eyes to look at me. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I just need to tell you something," I replied softly, shifting on his lap to face him and straddling his legs with mine. "My dad and I went to the school on Monday to begin the process of signing me out. Edward's eyes widened and he pulled his head back a little, as if to look at me more fully. You what? Bella, no. I already told you that I wouldn't have you sacrificing your education for me. And I already told you that I'm not sacrificing anything. I start my online classes this week, and it will still take me until the end of the school year to finish, I explained, hoping to reason with him. I thought your dad was against it, Edward sighed, rubbing his eyes with the heels of his palms. Why didn't you tell me? He was against it initially, but after the whole thing with Jessica, we talked and he agreed to let me do it. I didn't coerce him or anything, he came to it on his own. And he's laid down the ground rules, too. I still have to keep my grades up, or he said that he would re-enroll me in Forks High, and I'll have to finish that way anyway. No questions asked, I replied, pulling his hands away from his eyes. And I wanted to tell you, but there just hasn't been much of an opportunity for us to talk alone this week. Between school and the drama there over Jessica visiting with your family and Jasper, Alice and the baby, and I thought this should be something we talked about in private. Bella, you know how much I want to be with you. I just wanted to do it in the natural order of things, Edward said, the crease in his forehead deepening as his brow furrowed, and his thumb ran over my knuckles. You have no idea what it would do to me if you ended up resenting me for it in the future. I won't, Edward. This was my decision, not yours. Made because of me, he interrupted me, his gaze meeting mine. If I wasn't in the army, something like this would have never even crossed your mind. Maybe you're right about that, I conceded, sliding along his thighs to move closer to him, and sliding my hands around the back of his neck. But I know in my heart that if I don't do this, who I'll resent more than anyone is myself for wasting an entire year with you, when there was another way right in front of me. I know I can do this. I don't have any doubts about that, Edward replied with an uneasy chuckle, his hands linking behind my back and resting his forehead against mine. I listened as he drew in several slow breaths, and felt his brow gradually relax. You're really determined to do this, aren't you? Yes, I answered in a firm, yet soft tone, while gently tracing my fingers along the back of his neck. Promise me something, then, he spoke in a whisper, our eyes meeting again. Anything. Promise me that you'll at least go to prom, he said with a smirk, and I instantly began shaking my head in protest. Too late. You already promised anything. That was an extremely unfair setup, I grumbled and pushed on his shoulders with my hands, but he held firmly around my waist. We've talked about this. It's nothing more than a ridiculous high school ritual full of exceedingly overpriced dresses that no one will ever wear again, and obnoxious asinine behavior. And also one of the last chances you'll have to just hang out with your friends and be a teenager, for just one night, he added, and I sighed, rolling my eyes, but I knew he was right, as much as I didn't want to admit it. You might even have fun, you know, and it would make me happy, too. I bit back my initial sarcastic retort as I gazed at him, and felt his hands running along my sides. It was obvious that something as simple as a prom was extremely important to him for me to attend, and it really was only one night. You really suck, you know that, right? Edward smirked again and kissed me gently. I know. And you'll be okay with all this if I promise to go? I asked hopefully. He released a slow breath before finally nodding. Yeah, I'll be okay with all this. Then I will, if I can. After all, I'm not a student at Forks High as of Monday, I pointed out with a raised eyebrow. Nice try. There's always a way, Edward whispered, pressing his lips to mine again, tightening his arms around my waist, and turning us to lie back on the couch. His body settled on top of me, and I sighed in contentment, both at the feel of having him against me, and the relief that everything seemed to be coming together for us. Even though I had to let him go the following day, I had the knowledge that the instances of it in the future had just dwindled dramatically. The sound of crunching gravel and the familiar rumble of my father's cruiser outside caused us to leap off the couch, straightening our clothes until he entered through the front door. His gaze met us and he nodded. Hey, kids. Good evening, sir, Edward replied calmly, and I wanted to glare at him for being so relaxed as my heart continued to pound frantically. Instead, my gaze remained on my dad as he hung up his jacket and gun belt, indicating this was no brief stop home, and I noticed the glossed look of his eyes. Dad, are you okay? Yeah, I think I'm just coming down with that stomach bug that's been going around. I'm just gonna head to bed and get some sleep, he replied, glancing to Edward. Good to see you again, Edward. Take care of yourself out there in Maryland. Thank you, Chief Swan, Edward replied. Good night, Dad, I called after him, and he waved as he made his way up the stairs. I sighed and turned back to face Edward, sliding my arms around his waist. Well, I guess that puts the nix on the rest of our plans for the evening. If it wasn't for the fact that my dad never gets sick and he didn't just look like walking death, I might be a little more annoyed and think he might be spying on us." Edward laughed and wrapped his arms around me, kissing my forehead. "And we've got plenty of time for all that, Bella, and soon." I closed my eyes with a smile, hugging him tightly against me. "I can't wait. I love you so much." "I love you too, baby," he replied and pressed his lips to mine all too briefly. "I should probably go anyway. Gotta finish getting ready to leave and get some sleep. Early morning tomorrow." "Don't remind me," I whined and ran my hands over his chest. "Although, I guess it wouldn't be good for you to get contaminated with germs right before you go, huh?" "No, that would definitely not be good. But I'll pick you up in the morning around 7, Edward said, and I nodded as he took my hand. I walked with him to the door, tugging him back to me for one last kiss before he stepped outside and made his way out to his car. I stood watching as he pulled out and honked once before driving away, sighing as I mentally reminded myself that come June, we wouldn't have to go through the painful goodbyes anymore. "You sure you'll be okay, Dad? You don't need anything else before I go?" I asked my father for at least the 5th time in as many minutes as I brought a blanket into the living room where he sat in his recliner, wrapped tightly in his bathrobe. "You don't look so good, Bella." "I'll be fine. It's only a stomach bug, and I'll probably sleep the entire time you're gone. I just overworked myself last week," Charlie replied, sighing as I tucked the blanket around him. "Come on, quit fussing over your old man. You're going to be late. Alright, but if you're not better by tomorrow, you're going to the doctor whether you like it or not," I stated firmly, and he turned his head to give me a sarcastic glare. "Do not even look at me like that. I mean it. And don't forget, I got my stubborn streak from you. Okay, alright, now, go on. Edward's waiting for you," he groaned, shooing me away with his hand, and I hesitantly walked to the door, looking back at him again as I put my jacket on. "Isabella Marie Swan, go." I stepped out the door and hurried to Edward's waiting car, releasing a heavy breath as I lowered into the passenger seat. "Everything okay?" Edward asked in concern as he shifted into reverse. "You mean besides the fact that you're leaving today and I had to force medicine down my father's throat like an unruly child, because he has a fever of 102? "Yeah, everything's great," I groaned sarcastically, thrusting my head against the headrest. "Maybe you should stay here with him instead?" Edward stopped at the end of the driveway, looking at me questioningly. I quickly shook my head and rested my hand on his leg. "No, it'll be fine. He hates it when anyone hovers over him constantly, and I won't be gone long anyway. He'd feel bad if I missed seeing you off to stay home with him. Besides, he probably would have thrown me out the door himself, if he could have." Edward chuckled softly and pulled out, beginning our journey toward the bus depot. With every tree and structure that passed, I fought harder against the tears that were beginning to form, and I felt his hand come to rest over mine. "Don't cry, baby. It's not goodbye for long. Long enough," I mumbled as his fingers slid between mine, and I held them tightly. "It seems like you just got here and now you're going to be even farther away." "I know." He sighed and lifted my hand to brush his lips against my palm, then lowering it again to his lap. "But you'll be busy with all your school stuff, and you'll barely even notice I'm gone." "Edward," I whimpered, leaning over the space between us to rest my head on his shoulder. "Okay, maybe not barely notice, but I'll call you every chance I get, and Christmas is just a little over a month away, and we'll have more time for us then," he replied, kissing the top of my head and turning his attention back to the road. All too soon, we were pulling into that familiar bus depot, where I'd let him go nearly 3 months before, and I had to walk in there and do it again. It was hard to imagine that it ever got any easier to see him go when it felt almost more crushing at that moment than it had in August. Even with the promise of phone calls and seeing him again the following month, it did not change the fact that, in the meantime, he would be more than 2,000 miles away, on the other side of the country, where I couldn't touch him, kiss him, feel him, smell him, nothing. And there was also the fact that once he stepped onto that bus, I would be alone. Carlisle and Esme had remained home that morning, allowing me and Edward the chance to say our own goodbyes. We walked through the terminal together, my hand clinging tightly to his until we were standing in front of the bus. I put on my best smile for him as he turned toward me and slid his arms around my waist. "Thank you," Edward murmured and closed his eyes, resting his forehead against mine. "I'll be carrying that smile all the way to Maryland with me and thinking about it all day during your ceremony on Tuesday. I wish I could be there, but I know you'll be great, and I'm sure I'll get lots of pictures from Alice." I ran my hands along his arms to his shoulders, lifting onto my toes to brush his lips with mine, before pressing my body to his, as I held him securely against me to hide the tears falling down my cheeks. The bus beside us rumbled to life, indicating its imminent departure, and I dried my face on his jacket, and finally looked up to him. "See you soon?" Edward's forehead creased and an unexpected pained look came across his face, as he cupped my cheek and kissed me. "Yes, see you soon. I love you." "I love you too," I whispered back, finding more determination to hold myself together in the slight cracks in his armor. "Call me tonight?" His thumb stroked my cheek and he nodded, kissing me once more before pulling back and setting his car keys in my palm. My heart was beating like the wings of a hummingbird, watching him lift his bag onto his shoulder again, taking my hand and pressing his lips to my knuckles. I took a steadying breath as he walked to the bus and stepped onto it, waving to me from the window when he took his seat. I kept the smile on my face for him until I was sure he could no longer see me, as the large vehicle disappeared from the terminal and I ran to his car. I buried my face in my arms against the steering wheel as soon as I was inside, finally allowing the sobs to overtake my body. A knock on the window startled me, and I quickly turned my head to find Jake's eyes staring back at me. I rolled it down and took a deep breath, embarrassed to be caught in a moment of weakness, even if it was only Jake. He leaned on the window frame with his forearms, tilting his head slightly as his hand brushed my hair back from my face. "I heard today was the day. I thought you might need a friend." I felt my throat tighten with restrained sobs and opened the door, stepping out of the car and into his waiting arms. "You have absolutely no idea, Jake." Jake's hand ran along my hair as I cried into his shirt, rocking me back and forth in a comforting motion. "Come on, I'll drive you home." I sniffled, shaking my head and lifting it from his chest. "No, I'll be fine. Besides, Edward would kill me if he knew you drove his car, and then he'd kill you. I think he'd kill me faster if I let you drive in this condition and something happened to you in the car." "I'm pretty sure he'll understand, Bella," Jake replied, nodding toward the car. I sighed and lowered back into it, climbing across the seats and into the passenger side, reluctantly handing him the keys as he sat beside me. I turned my head to look over my shoulder toward the front door, hearing Charlie's heavy footsteps from inside hurrying up the stairs, and then brought my gaze back to Jake. I swear, he'd be better off to just stay in his room. He'd be so much closer to the bathroom, then. But that much further away from the flat screen. "Gotta think like a man, Bells," Jake laughed, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, last I checked, I had the wrong equipment for that." I grumbled, running my index finger along the rim of the Coke can in my hand. "Though if I didn't, I wouldn't be going through this right now." Jake's arm wrapped around my shoulders, and I leaned my head against him. "Yeah, but then look at the pickings you'd have for girlfriends," he teased with a mock shudder. "But it succeeded in its purpose," I laughed. "Come on, Bella, you're not gonna go into that emo girl mode where you eat chocolate and ice cream for days on end while watching sappy romances with a box of tissues, are you?" "Now who's being the melodramatic one?" "We didn't break up, Jake," I replied, rolling my eyes and taking a sip of soda. "Exactly, you didn't break up, but you're sitting out here in the freezing cold." "That is to avoid as much of the plague as possible," I interrupted him, pointing behind me to the house. "But you can't forget that you still have people here, too. People who love you and will miss you when you are the 1,000s of miles away," he continued, and I looked up to him quickly, to which he shrugged. "News travels fast around here, and even makes it out to the res sometimes. I know, you probably think I'm crazy and I'm way too young and making a big mistake," I replied, rolling my eyes as I repeated Mike's words from earlier in the week when I'd told him and Angela of my plans. "No, actually, I don't," Jake said, taking me by complete surprise. "It's obvious how much Cullen loves you, while definitely still surprising, with the way he used to be, and how much you love him. Are you two ever going to just refer to each other as Edward and Jacob?" I asked in annoyance, thinking back over the time I'd known Jacob, and never once had they only used each other's first names. Jake burst out laughing and shook his head. "Probably not. Some old habits just never die." His arm lowered from around me, and his hand took mine between us. I stiffened with the action, but he held me, firm but still gentle, in place. "He loves you, and I know that. But he's definitely not the only one in the world who does." "Jake," I whispered with an exasperated sigh, pulling back from him more. "What? Oh God, no," he replied in realization, his nose wrinkling slightly at the bridge. "You're like a kid sister to me, Swan." I released a breath of relief, feeling more at ease with him, and resting my head on his shoulder. "Well, thank goodness for that." I said with a slight chuckle, sliding my arm around his and hugging it tightly. It's not just all that, Jake. I mean, yeah, I miss him, and it was really hard to let him go today. But now, not only will Edward not be there on Tuesday, what if my dad can't go because he's sick? And Emmett's car will be in the shop until Thursday, and Rose will be watching Sarah Lynn while Jasper is at work. So what if Alice can't go either? I can't get through this by myself, Jake. I just can't. I was uncharacteristically hysterical by the end of my rant, and it even made me a little nervous. Tears began forming in my eyes as his massive hand rose to cradle the side of my head, and he gently kissed my forehead while I tightened my grip around his arm. You won't be alone, Bella. I'll go if you'd like. You would? I asked, raising my eyes to his, and he nodded. I offered him a small smile in return and resumed my embrace around his arm. Thanks, that means a lot to me. But first, he said, patting my knee with his hand, you need to get your scrawny ass inside before you catch your death of pneumonia, and that award is given posthumously. And I gotta go meet up with some friends. Very funny, Hulk boy, I replied as he stood and took my hands, pulling me off the steps and into his arms. I hadn't quite realized how cold I actually was until I felt Jake's warmth surrounding me, and I pressed my cheek more firmly against his chest. The weather in Forks had been crazy that season, and it felt more like January than November. Okay, yeah, I'm freezing. I'm gonna go inside. Okay, give me a call if you need me on Tuesday, he started with a smile, tapping my elbow lightly with his hand before turning to walk away. Hey Jake, I called out after him and he stopped to look back at me. You think you could come anyway? The more friendly faces, the better, you know. Jake gave me a broad smile and nodded. You bet. I'll see you then. Okay, thanks, be careful. I watched him wave over his shoulder as he walked down my driveway, until my attention was distracted by the shrill ringing of the telephone inside. I ran inside to grab it, my teeth chattering more insistently as my body adjusted to the warmth of the house. Hello? Hi, an uncertain, female voice responded, and I furrowed my brow. Is Charles there? My eyes widened and shot toward the stairs. No one ever called my dad Charles. He's not available at the moment. Can I take a message? Is this Bella? I inhaled sharply in surprise, unable to conjure a response to that. I'm Sue Clearwater. I met you briefly at the wedding last week. Oh, hi, I replied, still unsure of what to say to her. My dad's kinda sick right now, so he won't be coming to the meeting tonight. Oh no, is he okay? She asked with genuine worry in her tone. Yeah, just came home with a bit of a stomach bug last night. Okay, so that's why he didn't call, she said, seemingly to herself, pausing briefly before speaking again. Well, tell him that I called and I'll be by to see him later. Thank you, Bella. You're welcome, I replied tentatively, and we exchanged goodbyes. I slowly rested the phone back in its cradle, my eyes returning to the stairs in confusion. I slowly made my way up, one step at a time, until I came to the bathroom door, knocking lightly on the wood. Dad, he hummed in acknowledgement, and I heard the faucet of the sink turn on. Who's this Sue Clearwater, and since when do you have women offering to come visit you? The water shut off quickly and the door cracked open, revealing my father's insipid face. Why? Well, she just called and said she'd be by to see you later. And you didn't call her last night? I asked with a raised eyebrow. My dad shook his head slowly, making his way down the hall toward his bedroom, and mumbling under his breath so low that I couldn't hear him. Once he'd laid back on his bed, with me standing over him, he looked up at me and sighed. She's my grief support sponsor. You brought your sponsor to the wedding? I exclaimed, and I watched my father's face tinge slightly with color as he attempted to clear his throat. Oh no, she's not just your sponsor, is she? His eyes focused on the ceiling as he took a slow breath and finally brought them over to me. No, she's not. So, your dad has a lady friend? Way to go, Chief Swan. Edward's voice rang in my ear, and I groaned into my pillow in response. Bella, this is a good thing. Don't you think your dad deserves to finally have a girlfriend? No, not a good thing. If he has a girlfriend, why has it been such a big secret? And girlfriends mean sex, and just no. Baby, I think we outgrew spelling out the word in middle school. It's okay to say sex, Edward chuckled softly. Ah, Edward, I yelled, followed by a pathetic whimper, rolling onto my back in frustration and staring at the ceiling, with my blanket pulled up under my chin. For everyone else, maybe. For my dad, never. Come on, do you want to think about your parents doing that? Do I want to envision it in graphic detail? No. Am I naive enough to think it never happens? Definitely not, he replied, doing nothing to mask his amusement of the situation. Bella, cut him a little slack. The poor guy has been single for a long time, and you've even said yourself that you were worried about the empty nest thing when you graduate, and now that's coming sooner than later. So, oh no, I interrupted him, throwing the blankets off me and running for the bathroom again. The morning of my award ceremony, I'd woken up feeling slightly off, but I'd never been one for large crowds of people or having eyes on me, so the thought that I might be sick never crossed my mind, until I woke up in the emergency room after collapsing on stage with an IV in my arm and a temperature of 104. My father had been furious with me, intensified by his worry over his daughter lying in a hospital bed. Bells, why didn't you say something this morning? After I just got over this and barely made it to the ceremony myself. I didn't want to disappoint you, Dad. I thought I was just nervous, I whispered back to him, barely recognizing my own weak voice. Honey, it would take a lot more to disappoint me than missing a ceremony. I am so proud of you. I can't even begin to tell you, he replied, running his hand gently over my damp forehead as I closed my eyes, drifting off to sleep again. Edward, on the other hand, had been in a complete panic when I wasn't answering my cell that night, and there was no answer at home. When I was released early the following morning, I had numerous missed calls and voicemails, each of them more frantic than the one before. I hung up after the fourth one and called him, even though I was pretty sure he wouldn't be able to answer. As expected, I got his voicemail. Hey, baby, sorry I didn't answer my phone last night. I was in the emergency room, guess I came down with what my dad had. But don't worry, I'm okay. Just got a little dehydrated from the fever. Hope you're still feeling okay. I'm going back to bed now. I love you. I woke up hours later to a single-worded text. What? Obviously, he'd calmed down considerably since once he spoke to me himself, and could hear that I really was okay, despite my constant need to run for the bathroom, although I could still hear the shift in his tone when I picked up my phone off the floor, where I dropped it on my way through. You really should be in bed resting, baby, Edward said, worry and helplessness heavy in his voice. He was clear on the other side of the country, unable to do a damn thing for me. I leaned back against the tub, resting my cheek on the cool surface, and closed my eyes at the minimal relief it afforded me. I'm getting there. Are you sure you're feeling alright? Bella, don't worry about me. I'm fine, he replied with a sigh. You'd be saying that on your deathbed, I mumbled grumpily, rising slowly from the floor to head back to my room, and bury myself beneath the comforter again. There, I'm in bed, happy. A weak chuckle escaped him, and I could envision him rolling his eyes with a shake of his head. You're so stubborn, even when you're sick. But I'll be much happier when you're better. So get some sleep and stop worrying so much over your dad's love life. I groaned, followed by another slight whimper at the thought of our previous conversation. I knew he was right, but it was my dad. Fine, I sighed, my eyes already closing from the exhaustion of the movement to the bathroom and my hand pressing the phone to my ear. I miss you so much already. I miss you too, baby. Christmas will be here before you know it, Edward replied gently. I love you, and I'll call you as soon as I can. Okay, I love you too. Good night. My voice was barely coherent and I heard a soft good night before the line went silent, my hand falling to the pillow with my phone still in it. Dad, I promise, I'm fine, I said with a sigh as I sat at my desk 2 days later, hovering over the pile of schoolwork that had accumulated while I'd been bedridden. I haven't thrown up since yesterday, and I even held down toast. I haven't had a fever at all today, and I need to catch up on my classes. My father stood in my doorway with his arms folded over his chest, a worried look on his face. Are you sure? You'll call the station if you need anything, right? Yes, I will. Now go. The good people of Forks need protection a lot more than I do, I replied, shooing him away to do my work. Alright, just don't stay up too late with that, okay? I won't, I replied distractedly as my pen returned to the paper, knowing it was a lie. I wouldn't be able to sleep until I knew my assignments were caught up. I couldn't afford to fall behind, especially before I'd even really started. I hadn't actually spoken to Edward since that night on the phone, only receiving a text each night to check on me and say a quick I love you before bed. I knew he had commitments and was busy, and I would be seeing him in a little over a month, but it only drove home more of a reason that I needed to get through the program. The distance between us felt heavier with each passing day, and I wished more than anything that I could be there with him. The time he'd spent home had spoiled me, although I promised myself that I wouldn't let it. knowing how much harder it would make the separation. I couldn't help it. Everything about him in the nearly 2 weeks he'd been home seemed intensified. Every touch felt warmer, every kiss tasted sweeter, and even just the sound of his breathing was more calming to me somehow. It was amazing to me, the things that could so easily go unnoticed until they'd been stripped away, as he'd been from me for 9 long weeks. How could I not immerse myself in it and soak it all in? Yet, as a result, I found myself glancing up from my work periodically to gaze at one of the pictures of us on my desk. Before the army, before any kind of complications entered our lives, the root of what we really were, just Edward and Bella, I ached to be in his arms again that way, to be able to press my cheek to his chest and feel his heart beating against it. With that thought, I grabbed my phone and opened up a blank text to Edward. I hated when I would succumb to moments of weakness like that, when he felt millions of miles away, instead of the 3,000 he actually was. I always tried to be so much stronger than that, but in that moment, I was fighting an onslaught of tears. I miss you. Is it Christmas yet? I sent it off to him and attempted to refocus on my work, jumping slightly when my phone buzzed almost instantly. Not yet. Wish it was. Bad night? Was it that obvious? I thought to myself with a sad laugh. Only a little. Just really wishing you were here. The soft sound of piano echoed up from my desk, and I looked down to my phone to find it dancing over the surface. While he was home, Edward had made me a ringtone of the recording of Claire de Lune from my birthday CD, which I immediately set as his. Since then, it gave me one more reason to smile every time he called. "Hey, you," I whispered softly when I answered, and was met by the sound of loud voices in the background. "Hi, baby," he replied in almost a mumble. "I'm sorry I didn't call or anything earlier. I've been surrounded by these yahoos all night." A chorus of drawn-out hi bellas came through, followed by a growled shut up from Edward, but I could only chuckle. The sounds of their laughter began to fade until I hear a door closing, nearly muting them completely. "Sorry about that," he apologized in a strained voice. "You sound tired," I replied softly, worried that his tone seemed so much different than any other time I'd talked to him. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, it's just been a long day," he said with a sharp exhale, as I heard him sit down. "So, why the bad day?" I bit my lip and bent my leg up to my chest, hugging my arm around it, and resting my cheek on my knee. "I don't know, just really missing you today." "Well, more than usual." Edward sighed heavily and remained silent for several, very long moments. I suddenly felt like one of those annoying, needy girlfriends that constantly needed her guy's attention for reassurance that she actually had one. I was just about to apologize when I heard his voice again. "I miss you too, baby, so damn much. I'm really sorry that I gave you so much shit about that school program." I felt my forehead tighten in confusion at his seemingly random comment. "Okay. I thought we were past all that. What's going on?" I heard the chair groan with his movement, and another sigh escaped him. "Riley's girlfriend came in from Washington today, and she's moving out here in a few weeks," Edward mumbled in an uncharacteristically shy tone, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. "And I was so jealous all fucking night. Seriously made me wish it was June already." "Lame, huh?" My smile widened despite his quiet groan, and I leaned back in my chair again, relieved that I wasn't the only one feeling the heavy effects of our separation. After less than a week. "No, not lame. I have to say, I'm a little jealous right now, too. You know, I can always be a rebel, say screw the program and get my ass out there right now." "I'm not that sorry, Bella," he replied with a laugh, but it was a reassuring sound. He didn't seem quite as tense. "Waiting will make it that much better when we finally are together, right?" "Right," I said with a dramatic sigh, causing another chuckle from him. God, how I miss that. It could always make me smile, regardless of my mood beforehand. "Thank you for calling me tonight. I really needed it." "Ready to let me go so soon?" Edward asked, his voice lowering again. "I'm never ready for that," I replied, shaking my head and tracing the edge of my desk with my finger. "If I could, I would stay on the phone with you all night, but I have a lot of work to catch up on, and you sound like you're about to pass out." "I'm fine. I just need a few more minutes," Edward groaned and then cleared his throat. "Baby, if I asked you to do something for me, would you?" I raised an eyebrow at his question, leaning forward on my desk. "That depends. Am I going to regret saying yes?" "Maybe," he laughed, only heightening my suspicion, but I agreed nonetheless. "Do you still have that little nightgown from the night at the cabin? The one Alice got you?" Memories from that night flooded my mind, as well as the hungry look in Edward's eyes when I walked into that living room in the aforementioned nightgown and straddled his lap. The way he took me against the wall and made me feel more desirable than any time in the months previous. The first time we'd spent the entire night in each other's arms since our relationship began without any worries, and the one I kept in my thoughts often, remembering how warm and safe I felt that night. And looking forward to many more. Edward whispering my name as I involuntarily whimpered at the last memory, stirred me back to the present, and I cleared my throat. Yeah, it's buried in my drawer somewhere. Why? Do you think you could put it on and take a picture of yourself in it for me? I heard the soft growl in his voice as he spoke, and it sent a shiver through my entire body. I swear, it will be for my eyes only, but I really miss that body of yours. And since we didn't get a chance to celebrate our anniversary, it would be the perfect present. I felt my face flush with his words, but not for the reason I would have thought. With everything that had been going on and him being so far away at the time, I'd forgotten the year mark of our relationship in September. But he remembered he would never let me live it down. Wow, I've put up with you for a whole year already? Very funny, Bella, he replied, trying for sarcasm, but I could hear the amusement underneath. So will you? I don't know. What will I get for our anniversary? I asked, procrastinating, and he knew it. Judging by the sound of his heavy sigh. Yes, I will, if I can find it. Thank you, baby. And what do you want? I'll get it for Christmas. Fine, I'll think of something myself, he replied with the hint of a groan. I'll let you get back to your work so I can have more than a picture soon. Oh, I see. Get what you want from me, and you're ready to let me go? I said with a teasing laugh. Never, baby, he answered seriously, and I smiled. I love you, Bella. I love you too. Get some sleep, I whispered softly, and we said goodnight. I set my phone down on my desk and picked up my pen, intent on returning to my homework, but my gaze wouldn't leave the dimming screen. I closed my eyes, imagining the look on Edward's face when he received the requested picture, and I immediately stood from my chair. I made my way over to my dresser and drove my hand into my underwear drawer until my fingers brushed the soft satin. Gripping onto it, I pulled it from inside and held it up in front of me. I never thought I would be the kind of girl to take kinky pictures of myself to send to my boyfriend, being pretty damn sure he would do with it. Yet, I had to admit that the idea definitely had appeal and excited me. That such a small thing would affect him that way. Without another thought, I began to change and then grabbed my phone, lying out on my bed and removing my hair tie. I tried to position myself in a sexy pose, with my hair spread out over the pillow the way I knew he liked, and took a deep breath before aiming my phone at me and clicking the picture. I turned it over to look at the screen and groaned. I thought I looked utterly ridiculous. I took another shot, holding my arm away from me a little more, but still ridiculous. After one more attempt, I decided to just give up and text it to him, throw on my robe and get back to work. Within a few minutes, my phone began its little dance beside my keyboard and I picked it up, reading a text from Edward. If I do manage to get to sleep tonight, I'll be doing it with a huge ass smile on my face. I rolled my eyes with a smile of my own and typed out my reply. Maybe I'll be doing the same after hearing your sexy voice tonight. Okay, gotta go. Love you. Bye. Dustclid. I was suddenly very thankful that I was home alone with the burst of laughter that escaped me as I read, but also that his mood was so much lighter than when he had called. It was comforting that the simplest of things we did for each other had such a profound effect on the other, even if it was just a phone call or a picture. You're a pig, Edward Cullen. You know it, snort. Thanksgiving passed with barely any notice, although it was nice to spend the day at the Cullens' house with Edward's family, Alice, Jasper and Sarah Lynn, and watching Esme completely dote on her. Even my dad joined us with his lady friend, and while she was very nice and it was the first time I'd seen him smile so much in as long as I could remember, I was still wrapping my head around the idea that my father was dating. I hated the fact that I couldn't be more mature about it and do what Edward said, just be happy for him. Instead, I found myself scared for him. The loss of my mom had hit him really hard, and it had taken him so long to pull himself back up and stop blaming himself. I didn't think he could do it again if something went wrong, not with as happy as he seemed that night. He was so affectionate with her, and in public, holding her hand or keeping his arm around her shoulders, and even sharing a tender kiss or two, when they thought no one was looking. I couldn't stand to see him crushed again. My mind was temporarily distracted that evening by a video call from Edward, and though the moment was shared by the entire group of us, I still caught subtle looks in his eyes that told me that his gaze was on me, too. 3 more weeks and he'll be home, I thought to myself, attempting to ward off tears as he said goodbye, and he missed us all. After dropping Sue off at home later that evening, I moved to the front seat of the cruiser silently, my thoughts returning to their earlier path. Bella, cut him a little slack. The poor guy has been single for a long time, and you've even said yourself that you were worried about the empty nest thing when you graduate. Edward's words sounded in my head, and I released a heavy sigh. You okay over there, kiddo? My dad asked with a brief glance over to me. Yeah, I'm fine, I replied simply with my eyes lowered to my lap. Edward seems to be doing well, he said awkwardly, making it obvious that he was more than a little offset by my demeanor. He is, really well, actually. My dad sighed as he pulled into the driveway, shutting off the car, but not moving to get out. Bella, what's wrong? Nothing, Dad, I replied exasperatedly and reached for the handle, but his hand took my arm gently to stop me. Baby, you've been acting weird all day. And you really didn't seem comfortable at all around Sue, he said softly, and I looked away. Why? Did my dad have to choose just then to be so insightful? It made me feel guilty to hear that worried and sad tone return to his voice as he tucked my hair behind my ear. What is it? I don't know. I mean, she seems really great and everything, I sighed, leaning my head back against the seat. Is it serious? My dad chuckled nervously, running his hand through his hair and causing me to look over to him finally. Why do I suddenly feel like we've switched places, and I'm the teenager under the lamp? Sorry, I replied with a small laugh. You two just looked really close today. She understands me. Bella knows what I've gone through. She was about the age I was when I lost your mom, when her husband passed away in a car accident. It was just as sudden and unexpected, something no one can understand unless they've gone through it, he said solemnly, with his eyes lowered to his hands on his lap. I'm not exactly sure where it's headed. I've been out of the game for a long time, but yet she makes me happy, and I'd like to see where it goes and hope for the best. Before long, you're going to be gone, and I've got to start thinking of my life beyond just being dad. And to be honest, that sometimes scares me a bit. It was strange to see my father appearing so vulnerable, admitting to something that most men would see as weakness, even himself not even a year before. And for the first time in a while, I took a really good look at him. Since Rosalie and Emmett's wedding, he'd changed so much. The worried lines on his forehead and around his eyes seemed softened and less defined, as if he'd lost years off his features rather than aged. He'd almost taken on the appearance of the nervous teenager he'd joked about a few moments before with his first crush, more like the Charlie Swan I remembered from when I was a little girl, before our world was torn apart. He really did look happy. I reached over and slid my hand into the crook of his arm, resting my head on his shoulder, and felt his cheek settle onto my hair. I'm sorry, Dad. For what? He asked in a whisper, placing his hand over mine. For acting like a spoiled brat and ruining your day. Like some wicked witch is gonna come in and steal my dad away. It's not like that, I promise. I'm just worried about you, I replied and hugged tighter around his arm. My dad kissed the top of my head and I felt his mustache twitch as he smiled. Don't worry about your old man, Bells. I'm going to be just fine. The weeks following seemed to move in slow motion, despite the flurry of activity that accompanied the holiday season. I spent more time at the Cullens, getting reading for Edward's impending leave over Christmas, and giving my dad some time alone with his girlfriend. Sue had become more of a fixture in our house, coming over early every morning to wait for my dad to come home from work. It was odd to wake up to the smell of coffee brewing and breakfast cooking, knowing very well that it wasn't him or me doing it, and even more so to walk downstairs to find a face other than my father's there to greet me. It had also given me a chance to get to know Sue a little better, and I found it very hard not to like her. At 25, she wasn't that much older than me, but she had a certain wisdom about her through her experiences, and she quickly became someone I felt I could go to for advice or just girl talk, like the best friend sister mom in the house that I'd always wanted. And watching the way my dad's face brighten when he walked into the kitchen to both his girls and the tender kiss she gave him each morning, as she handed him his coffee, made all my earlier reservations disappear almost completely. They complemented each other and she was good for him. Essen seemed relieved to have me around more. With both of her sons now out of the house, she spent a lot of time at a loss of how to occupy her time. She'd even mentioned that she'd never been anything but wife and mother for more than half her life, since marrying Carlisle. The house really was far too quiet even for me, without the boys there, so Christmas music and endless decorating and baking felt like a welcome distraction for us both. The morning Edward was due to arrive, I woke up in his bed, surrounded by the light traces of his scent still stubbornly clinging to his pillow. I'd made plans to spend the night there to help Esm wrap presents and also avoid the chance of oversleeping, missing the moment he walked in the front door. I rolled over, pulling his thick comforter tightly around me, and saw the blinking red light on my phone. Getting ready to board. See you in a few hours. I love you. Glancing at the time, I shot up out of bed and grabbed my overnight bag, running for the bathroom to take a quick shower. The text had come hours before, and I had less than a half an hour to get ready. He's coming home. He's coming home, I repeated over and over in my head, unable to tame the smile on my face. When I finally made my way downstairs, I found Esm rushing around the living room fluffing pillows, and Carlisle shaking his head as he watched. Even I had to cover my mouth with my hand to restrain a giggle. Honey, it's our son coming to visit, not the president. He'll be okay if there's a single speck of dust or unfluffed pillow in the house, Carlisle said in amusement, laughing heartily as she attempted to glare at him very unconvincingly, I might add. Esm's eyes turned quickly out the window, and the accompanying tears and smile caused my stomach to tighten in excitement. My baby's here. 3 separate car doors closing literally caused me to begin bouncing in place, and I wrapped my arms around my waist as if it would keep me rooted to my spot. Emmett and Rosalie entered first, followed right behind by Edward a moment before he was engulfed in his mother's arms. Hi, Mom, he said with a soft laugh and hugged her tightly, nodding to Carlisle in a silent father-son greeting, as he patted Edward's shoulder. His face was smothered in Esm's kisses until she pulled away, lightly rubbing at his cheek to remove the traces of lipstick on his skin. Where's Bella? His eyes searched frantically around the room until he found me, lighting up as I lightly bit my lip and waved. A smile stretched across his lips as I dropped my arms, giving him a full view of the I Heart My Soldier t-shirt I bought just to welcome him home. He crossed the space between us quickly to sweep me into his embrace, making me laugh when my feet left the ground. We spun once before he set me back down and took my face between his hands, brushing a soft kiss on my lips and resting his forehead against mine. And once again, the world around us disappeared for a moment as we got lost in that space inside our own little bubble. My leg was bouncing relentlessly throughout the entire flight from Maryland to Washington, anxiousness consuming me more with every mile that passed. I was going home to see my family and friends, and of course, my Bella. I missed them all, naturally, but the ache I had been feeling from being so far away from Bella seemed more intense since my leave the month before. She seemed so different when I returned from basic, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Was it just from not seeing her every day for 9 weeks, when she'd been such a central part of my life since the moment I met her? Had being away simply changed me, shifting our association with each other, or had we both simply grown up and matured in our time apart, taking life a little more seriously? I wasn't sure, but it also didn't really matter. The experience had actually brought us closer, and it gave me immeasurable hope for the future. Then why was I so nervous? I was still running that question through my mind as we began our descent into Seattle, and it only made me more eager to get off that plane and back to my parents' house, where I knew Bella would be waiting for me as well. I checked my phone as soon as I got into the terminal and began weaving through the passel of holiday travelers. There was no text from Bella, which unreasonably caused my stomach to clench. I'd be seeing her in a matter of hours. What difference should it make that she hadn't texted back? Because then I would feel truly home. I was momentarily able to forget my tormenting thoughts when I caught sight of my brother coming toward me at baggage claim, with Rosalie right beside him, engulfing me in his massive arms as soon as he reached me. I'm getting my hug in now while I still can before you get home, and I lose you to a pair of smaller arms, Emmett joked, gripping me so firmly in his embrace that it made it difficult to breathe. Well, in that case, I better get mine, too, Rosalie said with a laugh, pulling my brother away from me and wrapping her arms around my neck. We've really missed you around here. I've missed you too, I mumbled against her shoulder, hugging her tightly as Emmett grabbed my bag from the floor. As we pulled apart, I was surprised to find tears glistening in her eyes that she quickly tried to blink away. It was a rarity to see Rosalie so emotional over anything. She didn't even cry at her own wedding or at Sarah Lynn's birth, but her arm clung around my waist all the way out of the airport and to the car. We'd grown close throughout the beginning of her relationship with Emmett, and she'd become my sole confidant through the weeks before Bella and I got together finally. We were an unlikely pair, but I could tell her things that I couldn't tell anyone else: my feelings for Bella, my irrational jealousy over her relationship with James, my regrets for going to Alaska, and my fear of losing her completely when I eventually left for good. And that bond between us had never faded, even if we kept it buried beneath the surface while in everyone else's company. But the tearful reaction was the last thing I would have ever expected from Rosalie. Emmett was talking animatedly throughout the entire drive to Forks, and while I wasn't ignoring him, my eyes were fixed on the screen of my phone. I began flipping through the menagerie of pictures I had stored on there, anxious to see each and every face sooner than I could physically get to them. My parents, Jasper and Alice, Sarah Lynn, and finally Bella. Many pictures of that beautiful face flew by until I paused at the one she'd sent me weeks before. It was a combination that only Bella could pull off for me: her sweet, innocent face with a hint of mischievousness in her eyes, the shy biting of her lip as she sprawled her sexy body along her bed in that little nightgown, and with a single glance telling me that every part of her was mine. Aside from the obvious reaction that picture always incited in me, causing me to shift uncomfortably in the backseat, it was also exactly what I needed at the moment. My girl, all mine. When I finally heard the crunching of gravel beneath the tires of the car, I looked up to see us pulling up to my parents' house and Bella's car parked right out front. I felt my shoulders immediately relax at the sight. She was there, just as she said she would be, text or no text. I couldn't get into that house quickly enough, even though Emmett and Rosalie somehow made it to the door first. I was swept into my mother's arms as soon as I stepped inside, and despite my anxiousness to see Bella, I relished in her embrace and my father's welcome home greeting. Soon enough, though, my eyes began scanning the room for Bella, and when I didn't see her, my heart began hammering in my chest. "Where's Bella?" I asked as my mother released me and stepped back to rub my cheek with her fingertips, where her lips had obviously left smudges on my skin with her kisses. When she moved aside, I turned around, and my gaze finally met Bella's across the room, where she was biting her lip, as she always did to contain her smile, and lifted her hand to give me a little wave. My own smile grew as her arms fell to her sides, and I read the bold letters on her tiny t-shirt. "I heart my soldier. God, I fucking love this girl," I thought as I made my way over to her as quickly as I could manage and pulled her against me. Lifting her feet from the floor, I immersed myself in the laughter that escaped her as I spun her around. I never thought anything would ever feel better than seeing her again after basic, but I was so wrong. Actually coming home to her waiting there for me was the most amazing feeling in the world. And the words across her chest expressing an unspoken pride in me and her unmistakable acceptance of my becoming a soldier was too overwhelming for words. I set her down, holding her face between my hands, and kissed the lips I'd been dying to have against mine again for weeks. With her forehead pressed to mine once our lips parted, I realized that I was right before. She was the missing element, what I needed to really feel home. She was my home now. "Hi," she whispered as her fingers gripped the fabric of my shirt at my sides. I opened my eyes to look down at her, and I was immediately immersed in the dark pools of hers, and I wanted to disappear within the sanctuary of that space I shared only with her. To lose myself in her arms for the entire time I was home, even though I knew that was impossible. But was 5 minutes too much to ask? I unwillingly released her for a moment to grab my bag that Emmett had just brought in, but kept a firm hold of Bella's hand, refusing to lose contact with her for even a second. The feeling of her slender fingers sliding between mine, her thumb running over my knuckle as we ascended the stairs toward my room, was one of the simplest things I'd missed, and I couldn't get her behind that door fast enough. The instant it clicked closed, I dropped my bag to the floor and took her other hand, backing my way toward the bed. Her smirk matched mine as I toppled back onto the mattress with her on top of me, and she immediately sealed my lips with hers in a kiss we'd both been aching for weeks. Naturally, my body began responding to the rolling of her hips above mine, and with a deep groan, I flipped her onto her back, hitching her leg higher on my hip. I knew we only had a few minutes before we would be expected back downstairs, but I needed to feel her against me in ways that would be entirely inappropriate in front of my family. We hadn't been together physically in so long, resorting to brief, whispered words on the phone or the occasional dirty text, trying to make up for the absence of everything else. And it was never enough for either of us. The following summer couldn't come fast enough. I would be finished with training, she'd have completed high school, and we'd hopefully never need to be apart again. Hi, I finally replied as I kissed along her neck, soaking in the feel and scent of her. Bella giggled softly, her hands roaming my back and hair, just as eager to soak me in as well, and causing her to release a contented sigh. Let's just stay right here the whole time you're home. No one will miss us over the holidays. I smiled against her skin as she hooked her calf securely around the back of my thigh, holding me against her. That's some pretty wishful thinking you've got going on there, baby. I know, she groaned with a pout, and I lifted my head, brushing my lips softly over her pursed ones. I just want as much time with you as I can get before we're sucked back into reality again. I'll make sure there's more time for us this time around, Bella. I promise, I whispered, running the backs of my fingers along her neck. In fact, I'm in the mood for a swim after lunch. How about you? Bella raised a single brow at me and rolled her eyes. Only you would think about going swimming in the middle of winter. You do realize there's ice on the ground out there, right? Which means an even lower chance of being disturbed and some real time alone, I replied with a grin, wiggling my eyebrows. Come on, I haven't been in my pool in months, and even longer since I've seen you in a bikini. I have to say the idea holds appeal. But no bikini, Bella replied, shaking her head. You can't deny me the bikini. I spoke in a gravelly voice as my lips ghosted over hers. Bella gave a soft moan, her hands lowering to grab my ass, and she rolled me onto my back, pecking a kiss on my cheek. Watch me. Her fingers shoved playfully against my mouth as she stood from the bed, beginning to move toward the door, but I grabbed her wrist, pulling her back beside me. Her laughter emanated through the room as the mattress bounced beneath her fall and was smothered by my lips, sealing over hers again. But that time, we simply melted into each other, her arms sliding slowly around my shoulders, soft brushes of her tongue on mine, teasing, but gentle. Her soft whimper that followed wasn't demanding, just held the same need and want to be close to me as I felt for her. My phone began buzzed in my pocket, and I sighed heavily, rolling off Bella as I pulled it out to check it. Hope you're decent, Mom's coming up, I read aloud, and I leapt from my bed quickly, followed more hesitantly by Bella, seconds before my mother's knock sounded on the door. Sweetheart, lunch is on the table, she said as she cracked it open slightly, watching as I began pulling clothes out of my bag that I had quickly moved to the bed. Edward, what are you doing? You can unpack later, you need to eat. I released a slow breath as she left the room, and I could see Bella out of the corner of my eye, gazing at me with her arms crossed. Don't ask, baby. Oh, you damn well know I'm going to, she retorted with an amused smirk, shaking her head. Then, just not now, please, I replied, taking her hand and leading her out of the room and down the stairs without another word. As soon as I could break away after lunch, I made my way out to the pool house with Bella, and while she changed in the attached bathroom, I got into my suit right at the edge and dove in. I lost myself in the silence of being submerged in water until my lungs burned from holding my breath and I broke the surface again. Once I wiped the excess water from my face and slicked my hair back, I looked up to find Bella by the stairs. With a smirk, she shed the robe covering her to reveal the white bikini I'd been begging for earlier, and slowly descended the steps into the water. I waded toward her, pulling her through the water the moment I could reach her and into my arms. Thought you weren't going to wear it. Who am I to deny my man of something so simple that he wants? Besides, it's also bribery, Bella replied, sliding her arms around my neck, and I rolled my eyes. You knew I wasn't going to let it drop. What was that up there? You've gone from the guy who used to have a ladder to his window, without a care in the world, to one that's leaping from the bed at the idea of getting caught kissing his girlfriend on the bed. What's going on? I sighed heavily, but her eyes held genuine curiosity, and all hints of teasing had vanished. Have you noticed my mother acting weird lately? Bella's forehead wrinkled in thought, her gaze pensive as she dipped her head back in the water to wet her hair, before looking back to me and shrugging. I don't know. She misses you guys and constantly has to stay busy. She doesn't know what to do with herself, but other than that, she seems fine. I gazed down at her and rested my forehead on hers, just wanting the last moment I would likely have with her for a while. I think me going away and Emmett getting married and moving to Seattle so quickly in succession maybe. It was too much all at once for her. Both of us growing up too fast or something. I don't know how to explain it, but she's almost more mothering to me now than she's been my whole life. Always asking to make sure I'm eating and sleeping while I'm away, or if I need anything out there, checking on me if I'm alone with my girlfriend a little too long in my room. Well, you are her baby, Edward. Did you honestly expect no empty nest stuff when you left? Bella asked, tilting her head slightly and tracing her fingers distractedly along the back of my neck. It was such a calming gesture. I could feel the muscles in my arms and shoulders begin to relax. My lips lowered to hers in a soft kiss, hugging around her waist more securely. It felt as if I was caught up in one of my dreams, feeling her body against mine with her arms wrapped tightly around my neck. A quiet moan rumbled in my chest that seemed to resonate in the heavy air around us as she traced her tongue along my lips, and they parted to deepen the kiss. Bella lifted up onto her toes, gripping me more firmly and pressing her breasts against me. She was successfully distracting me from the thoughts plaguing my mind for a couple of hours before, and more than ever, I wanted to stay in that moment with her, completely alone, with no eyes around us, to be free to be us. God, I've missed you. I've missed you too, she whispered back, lightly dragging her teeth along my lower lip. Let's not think anymore for a while, and just enjoy this. Everything is going to be fine. I shivered despite the warm, humid air as her legs rose under the water to wrap around my waist. My hands lowered to take hold of her hips, gripping them gently when she began rocking against mine and stirring the arousal building inside me. I felt my mind go blank as our bodies moved together and I pressed forward, eliciting a moan from her in return. It's been so long. Please, Bella panted heavily, and I wasted no time in lowering my swim trunks and pulling aside the fabric of her bikini bottoms. I held her eyes as I positioned myself against her, watching as she bit her lip in anticipation, and drew in a sharp inhale as I slowly pressed inside her. We remained still for a moment, enjoying the feel of being joined together again after weeks of talking and fantasizing about it, before her hips began rocking against me, and her head fell back. The water rippled around us with our movements, and I lowered my lips to her neck, feeling her hand rest firmly on the back of mine. It wasn't exactly the most romantic of settings for our first time together again, but our need for each other was so great that neither of us seemed to mind. It was just us, and that was all that mattered. My hands slid around her hips to hold her still, and I began thrusting inside her more rapidly. The muscles in her thighs tensed beneath my arms and her head raised again, her teeth biting lightly into my shoulder to muffle her long, guttural moan in response. I nearly lost it right there as she clenched around me, her body rigid in my hold. Shit, Edward, Bella gasped, her fingers digging into my skin as she began trembling, and her chest heaved against mine in shuddering breaths. I love you, I whispered, and her mouth sealed over mine, sucking at my bottom lips with a groan as she orgasmed. I couldn't hold back any longer after all our time apart, and the feel of her constricting around me, and I released inside her with my arms wrapping tightly around her waist. Our movements slowed gradually to a stop, but our kiss melted into a slow, passionate exchange before parting. Her fingers resumed the gentle, soothing motions along the back of my neck as our foreheads rested together again. I love you too, she murmured quietly, and I opened my eyes to look at her. A soft, satisfied smile had appeared on her lips, and I couldn't stop mine from joining it. Welcome home. The nerves in my stomach were raging after I left Bella at her house that night. I had both anticipated and dreaded what the evening would hold for several weeks, but nothing prepared me for the intensity of the trepidation I felt. I spotted Chief Swan's cruiser parked outside the station, and my palms began to sweat even more. The last time I sat down and talked in length with Bella's father, it had not been under the best of conditions, and that particular discussion ran rampant through my mind. Sit down, Edward, he said in a calm but stern tone, sliding one of the kitchen chairs away from the table, the legs screeching in their path along the linoleum floor. I'd never been so terrified of any single man in my entire life as I was at that moment as I moved across the room to lower into the seat. Hearing the creaking from above me did not help my anxiety at all, discerning from the movement of the sound that it was Bella pacing her floor upstairs. I drew in a deep breath as he sat down across from me, fixing me with a hard stare, and folding his hands in front of him. Sir. Chief Swan cut me off abruptly with the raise of his hand at me, shaking his head. I have a few things I would like to say before you start with what I am sure is a well-rehearsed speech. The collar of my shirt seemed to tighten around my neck with his tone, making it impossible to swallow against the lump that had formed in my throat. I began rapidly imagining all the possible things he could say to me, considering the conditions we were there under, the worst of which was stay the hell away from my daughter. The first thing you need to understand is that girl upstairs is my life. If anything ever happened to her, I would have nothing left. So, I'm sure you can understand that not finding her where she was supposed to be under any circumstances would cause me a fair bit of alarm. But gone all night with no way of reaching her, terrified that something had happened to her in that storm. I don't even have the words, he began, his even voice faltering only slightly as he spoke, but his expression remained in place. It took me a while to get used to the idea of my baby dating at all. But to see her getting out of a car with a boy she's spent all night with lying to me about being at a friend's house, that's not the girl I raised, and pardon me for being frank, but you're leaving come summer. My daughter is not a plaything, and I won't watch her get her heart broken when you've gone and are done with her. My chest tightened at the pain lacing his words and the slight clenching of his jaw. I wasn't sure if he was ready for me to respond, so I waited until he leaned back in his chair, folding his arms over his chest, and his brow rose expectantly. Chief Swan, I completely understand the reasons behind your feelings and concerns, and I can assure you that the last thing I ever want to do is hurt Bella. She is the most important thing in my life, and I couldn't imagine her ever not being a part of it. But you're leaving her behind to join the army, and she strongly believes that she's in love with you, he said, swallowing hard as he paused in his statement. She's still so young, Edward. Sir, I know we're both young, and my leaving won't be an easy thing for either of us. This is something I've wanted to do for as long as I can remember, and I never imagined that I would be leaving anyone behind other than my family. But I'm not leaving her, I replied, trying to keep my voice calm and reassuring. She's not just a fling for me. I love her very much, and I want her to be a part of my future. My heart pounded harshly as I watched his hand rise to his face, running his fingers down his mustache with a speculative look in his eyes. And if she decides that this isn't what she wants? I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly, finally looking down to my lap. As that thought ran through my mind, we'd be apart a lot over the next 2 years at least, and I knew that anything was possible in that time, as much as I prayed for the contrary. When I wasn't there every day to hold her and tell her I loved her, when she was constantly surrounded by guys who could give her that, I knew she could always change her mind. Then I would let her go. If that's what would make her happy, I would do it. That's all I want for her, even if I'm not the one to give it to her. I heard him sigh heavily, and I looked up again to find him leaning forward on his elbows, his fingers pressed to his lips. I know you're a good kid, Edward, and I think it's a very honorable thing you're doing with this enlistment in the army, and in everything you just said, but what happened the other day, there could have been a multitude of consequences, and still can. I don't want to see Bella get herself into trouble before her life ever really begins, or yours for that matter. Aside from the legal repercussions that could have been a factor, I cleared my throat and shifted nervously in my chair with the implications his uncomfortably stated words presented. I was 18 years old and in a sexual relationship with the police chief's minor daughter. If he wanted to, he could eliminate any of my aspirations for the future with a criminal record. But in addition to that, my girlfriend's father was discreetly broaching the topic of that intimate relationship I had with his daughter, a subject I would even have difficulty discussing with my own parents. I tried to find the words to respond, but no sound escaped me despite my numerous efforts. You can relax, I'm not taking that route, but this is very serious. I know everything may seem safe, but sometimes, all the precautions in the world are not enough. Bella herself is living proof of that. I don't regret having my daughter, but I want something better for her. Finish high school, go to college, be prepared for life. Chief Swan spoke in a low voice, his eyes locked on me. I want that for her as well, sir, I replied once I finally found my voice again, trying to keep my gaze on his. And no matter what happens, I will take care of her to the best of my ability, whatever that takes. I don't want for her to sacrifice anything more than she already is. He stared at me silently for what felt like an eternity, seeming to size me up, as I could almost see the wheels turning in his head. Had I said something wrong? I ran over every word I'd spoken in the last half hour of talking to him, each expression on his face. But Charlie Swan was one of the most difficult men to read that I'd ever met, and I knew that when it came to his daughter, he was exceedingly protective. He drew in several long, deep breaths as we sat there in the quiet. The only sign of movement was his eyes as they flickered over me. Edward, he finally spoke, clearing his throat and sitting up straighter. I'm sure you mean everything you've said, and it took a lot for you to come here today, and I respect that. But the fact still remains that you've violated my trust, and it's going to take a lot more than a little talking to fix that. Yes, I know, sir, I replied with a nod, lowering my eyes as I prepared myself for what was to come. So, this is how it's going to be. I'd sat there and listened as he laid down the rules. I couldn't see Bella outside of school until the end of the semester, and even then, I wasn't allowed in the house without his supervision, and we could have our one date a week as long as she was home by his set curfew. No more sleepover at Alice's, nothing like the freedom we'd had with each other before, until he felt he could trust me with his little girl. It was the longest semester of school imaginable, but it was worth it. Being with Bella again in that meadow where everything began for us, absorbing every touch and the feel of her in my arms again, was made all the more exhilarating by the absence of it all for months. We didn't even give any thought to having sex that night. That wasn't all we were, and the time apart had actually been good for us, giving us the opportunity to realize that. The physical aspect of our relationship obviously hadn't ceased. We still had our moments of need, but we also learned to appreciate the simpler things, and things had improved between me and Chief Swan as well. Yet that knowledge did not alleviate the nervousness I felt at coming face to face with my girlfriend's father again. I stared at the front of the building for several minutes before taking a deep breath to steady myself and stepped out of the car, tugging my jacket tightly around me against the cold wind as I jogged toward the door. The moment I stepped inside, my eyes met Chief Swan, standing there waiting for me. Too late to turn back now, I thought to myself through my anxiety, but quickly shook off that idea. I didn't want to turn back. "Edward, good to see you," he said, approaching me and holding his hand out to shake mine. "Glad to be home." "Yes, sir," I replied with his hand clamped firmly in mine, hoping I didn't appear as nervous as I felt. "I'm sorry for bothering you at work, Chief Swan, but I was wondering if I could have a word with you in private, without Bella present." His brow furrowed into worried lines across his forehead, but he nodded. "Of course. Is everything all right?" I hummed an affirmation as he led me through the station to a desk in the back, and I sat down across from him. He leaned back in his chair, eyeing me expectantly. Once again, I found myself at a loss for words and cleared my throat, trying to free them. "Edward," he said, urging me to begin. I took a deep breath in an effort to gather the courage to speak, and finally looked up to him again. "Sir, as you know, I will be graduating from training school at the end of next summer. And with Bella also graduating from high school in June, it's our hope that she will be joining me wherever I'm stationed afterward." Not that I needed reminding, but yes, he replied, causing me to tense slightly, until I saw the hint of a smile come across his lips, followed by a brief chuckle. "Son, relax. I wouldn't have signed the papers for the accelerated program if I wasn't fully aware of that possibility, or had any serious reservations about it. I know you'll take good care of her, as if she couldn't do so herself." I released a heavy exhale, feeling my shoulders loosen minimally. I love and respect Bella more than any woman in my life, aside from my mother, and I want to do everything right by her. His face shifted to that of confusion, folding his arms over his chest, and my heart started racing at the familiarity of that sight. "Chief Swan, I would like to ask for your permission to marry your daughter." Chief Swan's face instantly blanched, and it was almost impossible to tell if he was even breathing for a moment. "Everything right by her? Please don't say there's something more to tell me." My eyes widened, and I quickly shook my head. I should have chosen my words better, knowing full well his deepest fear for Bella, to become pregnant, forced to get married too soon, and regretting it for the rest of her life. "No sir, nothing like that. It's just that I want Bella there with me, living with me. And I know how sudden this may seem, and we're really young to be considering things like this, but I want to take care of her in every way I can, and I don't want to simply live together. I've just been raised with the belief that the first woman I lived with outside of my parents' home would be my wife, as it should be." He sighed heavily, his eyes falling to his lap and shaking his head. "I can't say I'm entirely surprised. I just wasn't expecting anything like this so soon. This is a very serious decision, son, not one to be taken lightly. I can assure you, I'm not. I've been thinking about this for quite a while," I replied, rubbing my palms along my thighs to dry them of the nervous perspiration. "I know that Bella is the one I want to spend the rest of my life with, and I respect her too much to just live in sin with her." Unexpectedly, he burst out in a single laugh, completely breaking my train of thought, and he brought his eyes up to meet mine. "Are you sure you're only 18? I haven't heard that phrase since I was about your age." I chuckled nervously and shrugged. She just deserves something better than just shacking up somewhere with her boyfriend, and as my wife in the army, I could provide everything she needs for her, and take care of her the way I want to. "You wouldn't have to worry about her, Chief Swan." His hand ran along his jaw as he sat in deep thought, his eyes still locked on me. I know you love her. I could see that plain as day even a year ago. I trust you with her, you've earned that much. But I would be lying if I said I didn't have at least some misgivings about my daughter getting married so young. I don't want to see her giving up her entire future. I understand, sir, I said with a sigh, fighting to keep my hand from dragging over my hair with the defeat coursing through me. However, he continued and my eyes shot back up to him, finding a thoughtful expression on his face. I also can't deny that it would make me feel better than shacking up with her boyfriend. But are you absolutely sure? Yes, sir. Absolutely sure, I replied with a certain nod, reaching into my pocket and pulling out the small ring box, setting it on the desk. I've put a lot of thought into it, and I've been holding onto this since right after I got to Maryland. But I couldn't give it to her without your blessing. Chief Swan hesitantly reached across the desk, taking the box between his fingers and bringing it in front of him. I held my breath as he opened it. The ring wasn't anything extravagant, just a simple solitaire with a silver band. But it was something that I bought with my own resources, with Bella in mind, as it should have been done. I think she'll love it, Edward, he finally stated, a smile stretching across his face, and looking to me with the trace of restrained tears in his eyes, as he set the closed box back in front of me. And for the love of God, stop calling me sir. If you're going to be my son-in-law, you can at least call me Charlie. Before Bella arrived for Christmas Eve, I sat down with my parents to have a similar discussion with them, but I was not prepared for the reaction I got. My mother began to cry and left the room, as if I was telling her all over again that I was enlisting, rather than asking my girlfriend to marry me. My father patted my shoulder as he stood to follow her upstairs, and I heard their voices through the door of their bedroom. This isn't a bad thing, he said in his calm, gentle tone. How can you say that? They are just children, she exclaimed, her tears evident in her voice. Edward is old enough to risk his life for his country, and he is certainly old enough for this. He's not a boy anymore, and hasn't been for a long time, my father replied in a tone I had never heard him take with my mother. He sounded almost angry. Emmett isn't that much older than Edward, and he's married and gone. Whether it happens now or 10 years from now, someday Edward is going to get married too, have kids, and a life of his own. He's grown up, and there's a lot worse thing that could happen than marry the girl he loves. We couldn't ask much better for our son than Bella. My mother was silent for several minutes aside from her sobs, and my dad reappeared downstairs in the living room beside me. It'll be all right, Edward, you know your mother. When do you plan on asking Bella? My forehead creased at his question and the sudden shift in topic. It was then that I noticed the increased lines around his eyes, but not from smiling. He looked tense and strained, and appeared more tired than I'd seen him in years. I am not sure, but is everything okay with you, Dad? His hand came to my face in a fatherly gesture as I looked up at him, and he made an attempt at a smile. Don't worry yourself over me, son, I'm happy for you. And once your mother finally comes around, she'll probably be the first in line to help start planning the wedding. I think that ring would be an excellent Christmas present for a certain little lady. I watched him walk away, hearing his office door close behind him upstairs, and finally taking a deep breath before rising myself. I made my way to my room, rolling my neck against the tension built there from my mother's unexpected behavior. Bella was going to be arriving in a little under an hour, and I couldn't let her see me that way again. She would begin asking questions as she had the night before in the pool, and I had no idea how else I would be able to explain it. And if anything was imperative to get absolutely right and perfect in our relationship for years to come, it would be the day I asked her to spend the rest of her life with me. My fingers closed around the vinyl fabric, covering something I had not laid eyes on, let alone touched, in months. My piano. BPOV. I stepped inside the Cullens house after receiving a line of teasing from Emmett, because I still knocked on the door instead of coming right in, and heard a sound echoing down the stairs I hadn't heard in far too long. Edward was playing his piano. I quietly crept up to his room and stood undetected in the doorway, just watching him. The sight alone was one I had missed, even if it was a rare one at that. His long fingers running fluidly over the keys, lips pursed in concentration, and his neck bent forward ever so slightly. It was an image that had been burned into my memory from the very first time I'd seen him play. Yet, even that was not what held my attention so utterly, and even brought tears to my eyes. Edward's choice of song, a version of I'll Be Home for Christmas I'd never heard, was powerful in itself, but combined with the creasing of his forehead and the tenseness of his jaw, it was a little disconcerting. He looked almost worried, and that in turn worried me. I walked up behind him, bringing my hands to rest on his shoulders, but he didn't miss a beat. A tiny smirk appeared on his lips, and he lifted his head slightly to rest back against me. "It's about time. I thought you were never going to come away from that doorway," he said with a chuckle, keeping his fingers moving over the keys while looking up at me. I smiled, leaning over to brush his lips with mine, and then hugging my arms around his shoulders as he played the final notes of the song. His hand rose, entwining his fingers with mine, and he settled his head back against me more. Well, I thought about hanging back there for a while. The view was fantastic, after all. "How'd you know?" "I always know when you're nearby, baby," he whispered as he lifted our joined hands from his shoulder, pressing his lips to my palm. "Being away from you has only made me more acutely aware of you." His words made my smile broaden, and I nuzzled my face against his neck, breathing him in, still unable to absorb the fact that he was actually there. I could touch and kiss him, and he was safe in my arms. I tried my hardest to simply concentrate on that, without the nagging in the back of my head reminding me that, once again, it was temporary. I stepped around the bench to sit on his lap, kissing him full on the mouth and running my fingers along his scruffy jaw. I felt his fingers grip firmly on my hip, his other hand reaching up to lace in my hair to hold me against him, sucking lightly at my lower lip. "Miss me much?" Edward smirked against my lips as his fingertips massaged my scalp, and I nearly moaned at the pleasurable feel of it. "You have no idea, Bella." I opened my eyes to look at him with the sudden change in the tone of his voice, one I hadn't been expecting. The dimming light of the room with the falling dusk only exemplified his features, and what I saw there worried me a little. The shadows around his eyes were deeper than usual, and even with the short length of his hair, it somehow managed to become completely unkempt. And his hold around my waist tightened slightly as our foreheads rested together. "Hey," I whispered, running my thumb along his cheek, but he never looked at me. "Edward, what's the matter?" Edward shook his head slowly, taking a deep breath and opening his eyes, the mask of a smile appearing on his lips. "Nothing, baby. Just didn't sleep well last night. Not used to being in an actual comfortable bed anymore." I raised an eyebrow at him and was about to speak again when he pressed his lips back to mine, silencing me. Under any other circumstances, I would have called him on it, but I just couldn't bring myself to right then. I'd barely had him in my arms for 36 hours, and I was unable to say a word. Besides, it was Christmas Eve and I wanted to enjoy the little moment of peace we had before we'd be called back downstairs for dinner and gift exchange, since Rose and Emmett were returning to her family's home that night. I shifted my body to straddle his legs, our kiss gaining heat with each passing second and his hands lowering to grasp my hips. Holding him as tightly as I could, I still didn't feel close enough, but all too soon, our time was cut short by the sound of his mother's voice echoing up the stairs. "Coming, Mom," Edward called back to her with a heavy sigh, and lifted us both from the bench. His eyes held mine as I unhooked my legs from around his waist, and he kissed me gently once more, before my feet touched back down on the floor. "I swear, we will have some time alone together tonight. Once my brother leaves, we are out of here." I chuckled softly and took his face in my hands, rising up on my toes to brush his lips with mine. "I love you. I'm just glad you're here." Edward seemed more hesitant than usual to leave my side all evening, from the second we left his bedroom. In fact, the entire atmosphere of the Cullen house seemed strange and tense, even Emmett, which was extremely odd. It was the complete opposite of what I'd expected, with the whole family being together for the holiday, even if just for the evening, and I really couldn't understand it. Edward's statement about his mother's behavior began echoing through my head, and I slowly began to see what he was talking about the day before. The previous Christmas, everything had been so different. Even with Emmett being away at college and Edward's enlistment, there was a lot more laughing. The mood was lighter, not so much anymore, and it was very unnerving. Esme kept giving me looks across the room that was definitely a far cry from the loving, almost to the point of clingy, vibe I had gotten from her over the previous few weeks. While not contemptuous or angry either, it still had me holding tight to Edward's arm by the end of night, until Carlisle finally noticed and excused themselves for the evening. Emmett and Rosalie took off shortly thereafter, leaving the room still and silent, and me completely alone with Edward. I glanced over to him and his head was resting back with his eyes closed, appearing tense even when I ran the backs of my fingers along his jaw. If he even noticed that I touched him at all, he never so much as hinted at it, until I leaned toward him and brushed my lips against his cheek. He moved into the touch and turned his head to kiss me soundly, yet still gently, but all too soon, he pulled away with a disgruntled sigh. I love you. Edward's eyes opened to look at me just as I felt a tear escape down my cheek. His forehead tightened as he brought his hand to my face, brushing the trail away with his thumb. I felt so stupid crying for no apparent reason, but it seemed as if a floodgate of emotion had erupted inside me, and I needed him so much in that moment. I love you too, baby. I'm sorry about all this tonight. It's not your fault, I replied, shaking my head. You just still seem a million miles away. This is not how I wanted to spend Christmas with you, that's all. We should be enjoying the limited time we have together, not walking around on eggshells constantly, he said, his teeth clenching as he rested his forehead against mine. I sighed, gently taking his hand and standing from the couch. Come on, let's get out of here for a while. We can go back to my house and exchange our gifts there. I thought the suggestion would calm him at least a little, but he actually seemed to blanch slightly, and his grip tightened a bit on my hand, almost frozen in his spot. Just as quickly, he appeared to relax and nod, clearing his throat as he stood to join me and pecking my cheek with his lips. Sure, just let me grab our coats and everything from my room real quick. Be right back. Before I could even respond, he shot from the room and ran upstairs. I made slow, hesitant steps toward the door to wait for him, trying to make sense of his behavior just then. His mood fluctuations were so drastic and swift, I could barely wrap my mind around it even then. Men are so strange, I thought to myself. When he didn't come right back down, and I didn't hear any movement from above me, I began to make my way toward the stairs. I'd barely touched my foot to the second step when I saw him appear suddenly at the top, shaking his head sharply. Sorry, I just misplaced something. You ready? I nodded silently as he helped me into my jacket and then took my hand to lead me outside. Do you just want to take your car and I can come back for mine tomorrow? Edward began shaking his head again, and I felt my heart sink a little more. I thought he'd want to spend even the few extra minutes completely alone with me, before we were again in a parental's company. Even if we did manage to steal away to my room, the door would still be open and I couldn't remove the image in my head of my father sitting in the kitchen below, with his head tilted slightly toward the ceiling to listen for the first hint of a creaking bedspring or inappropriate sounds from either one of us. Even though my dad insisted that he trusted me and Edward, I didn't know how much I believed that. Yet as I moved to let go of his hand, he pulled me back toward him and wrapped his arms around me tightly. I still want to spend time with you tomorrow, just not back here. I pulled back to look up at him, and his eyes met mine a moment before his lips did. Okay, I understand, I think. See you in a few minutes, he said with an odd smile and released me, rummaging in his jacket pocket for his keys as he made his way to his car. The drive back to my house was filled with a nervous tension that I couldn't shake. I periodically looked to my rearview mirror, and with each illumination of his face from the passing street lights, I swore I saw him talking, possibly even yelling, inside his car. And when he still hadn't relaxed much by the time we arrived at my house, I seriously began to think that Christmas Eve was just going to be a bust. Hey, kiddo, didn't expect you around here until much later, my dad said as we walked into the house and I set the bag in my hand at my feet. Yeah, Edward and I just decided to hang out here for a while tonight and exchange presents and stuff. Mrs. Cullen didn't seem much up for company this evening, I explained, and then noticed my father's shift in expression as his eyes locked on Edward, who stood stiffly beside me. Oh, right, I see, Sue, he said in an almost stammering voice, sliding his arm around her waist while never taking his eyes off Edward. How about we head over to your place for a bit? At first, Sue looked about as confused as I was, but one glance at my dad, and she began to nod. Yeah, I did forget the eggnog tonight, so we'd have to go back anyway. Okay, not only are men strange, but now, it's afflicted Sue as well. Perfect. Didn't think this night could get any more awkward. After they hurried out the door, I turned to face Edward with a pointed look, and he held his hands up defensively. I swear, I have no idea. Yeah, I replied sarcastically, folding my arms over my chest. You know, because it's completely natural for Christmas Eve to turn into the Twilight Zone, and my father to leave his daughter alone in a house with her boyfriend voluntarily, and all as he's looking at said boyfriend, of course. Edward sighed and took my hand to unlock my arms, pulling me closer to him. The knuckles of his other hand gingerly brushed along the edge of my face, and it would have had its normal calming effect on me if it hadn't been for the look in his eyes. My fingers rose to curl around his, shaking my head nervously. Edward, you're really making me nervous. You're blowing so hot and cold. What's going on? I asked, my eyes shifting between his. He inhaled deeply and released it in a slow breath, weaving his fingers with mine. I guess I'm just really nervous about how you'll like your present. I looked at him quizzically, moving with him as he led me by the hand to the couch and lowered me down beside him. Wait, mine first. I felt his gaze follow me as I crossed the room again, crouching down beside the bag on the floor and retrieving a wrapped, medium-sized box from inside. I was determined to ease the tension surrounding us and could see that it almost immediately worked as I set the box in his lap. His features relaxed slightly as his eyes lowered to it and then looked back to me as I sat down beside him again. Within the $50 limit we agreed to, right? Well, within parts of it. Nothing at all, actually, I replied, nodding my head and watched as he began tugging at the paper. When he finally got the box open, his eyebrows rose abruptly at the care package I'd put together for him. Beneath the container of homemade cookies I'd made for him, there was a photo of us from Emmett and Rose's wedding in a frame I'd decorated with tiny seashells I'd collected along the beach, which earned a smile from him until the shock replaced it again. He lifted the frame as I tried to contain my blush while he extracted the Victoria's Secret catalog and the tiny bottle of warming massage oil. He cleared his throat and shifted slightly in his seat before chancing a look over at me. Really, baby? You think Victoria's Secret is what does it for me, huh? My lips twitched at his slightly amused tone, a little more relief settling in on me. Just open it. Edward's eyes moved hesitantly from mine and opened the magazine, and a half-dozen photos fell onto his lap. Oh, you play dirty. After his reaction to the pictures I'd sent him before, an idea sprang into my head. While I didn't have an abundance of lingerie at my disposal at 17 years old, I knew that variety could accomplish just as much, so I'd taken several pictures of myself in that nightgown he loved, in various positions on my bed, in my chair, and even a couple lying on the rug. They are for your eyes only, and when those aren't enough, you can open this. He watched as I lifted a sealed pink envelope from the bottom of the box, waving it twice before settling it back inside and kissing his jaw. And what would be in there? I shook my head with my finger pressed to his lips, knowing that he would rip it open right then and there if I informed him of what lay inside. The contents of the letter I'd written him and extra photographs accompanying it, showing a little more skin, definitely had the potential to shift the atmosphere of the night even more. And that was the last place that our entire focus should be that evening, and despite how close we'd become, I still might find myself trying to hide under the couch. It was bad enough that I was already outwardly supplying my boyfriend with the means to get himself off as a Christmas present. Not while I'm right in front of you, okay? An easy smile returned to his features, and he pressed a kiss to my fingertip before I let it fall from his face, kissing my lips softly before packing up the box again. You realize these are probably gonna be gone by tomorrow, right? I laughed as he held up the container of cookies again. Don't worry, I'll make you more before you leave. Edward set the box by his feet and then shifted his body toward me with a much smaller one in his hand. His smile faded slightly as he picked at the silver wrapping without looking back up to me. I really had no idea what you get you for Christmas, Bella. Everything just seemed wrong, or too cliché, or just plain lame. So, oh no, you didn't go over our $50 limit, did you? I asked with a heavy sigh. No, not exactly, he replied, setting the box in my hands while his shook slightly. And what does not exactly mean? I retorted skeptically, sliding my finger beneath the paper's edge and popping it loose. I lifted the lid to the box and released a gasp, my eyes returning sharply to Edward. Liar. Nope, the tags ran me 45, he replied with a smirk as he lifted a set of dog tags from the box that were almost identical to the ones I'd given him the year before, so I knew he wasn't lying about the cost. He slipped them around my neck and I narrowed my eyes at him after I'd gotten a better look at them. And as for the engraving, a buddy of mine did it for nothing, so I'm off the hook. Tears filled my eyes as I lowered them again to look at the tags. On one, there was a pair of boots engraved with Edward inscribed on the back, and on the other bearing my name, a rose encased by a heart. I smiled and took Edward's face between my hands, kissing him firmly and then sliding my arms around his neck. You had no need to be nervous, baby. I love them, they're beautiful. I felt Edward's hand run along my back and sides, as well as his deep draw of breath. That's not exactly what I was nervous about, baby, though I'm glad you like them. I placed my hands on his shoulders, pushing him back from me slightly and searching his face. Then what is it? Edward's fingers closed around mine and brought them to rest between us, running his thumb over the promise ring that still resided on my right hand. Bella, you know probably more than anyone else how perfect I'm not. I've made a hell of a lot of mistakes in my life, and I feel very fortunate that, despite them, you still love and want me. I know what I said last year when I gave you this, and at the time it felt right, but a lot has changed in the last few months, and we need to change with it. I held my breath, unable to respond as my hands shook in his, and as if he could sense exactly what I was thinking and feeling, he held them both between his securely. I may have been lax in some of my morals in the past, but there are some things that have never changed, most especially when it came to when I found the right girl woman for me. And I've known for a long time that it's you, but everything is moving so fast now. I want you with me wherever I go, Bella, but there are things I need to do first. Like what? I asked, barely above a whisper, so afraid that he was going to tell me that he wasn't ready for me to join him next summer, that we would have to spend even longer apart, and just with how things had been in the last 4 months, I didn't know how I'd bear being away from him longer than the next 8. Bella, this is one thing that I never want to mess up, because I honestly don't know how I'd manage to get through a single day without you in it. So call me old-fashioned, but I had a talk with your father, asking for his blessing and permission, Edward said softly, pausing and reaching into his pocket again, and this time, retrieving a much smaller box, velvet and unwrapped. He turned one of my hands over and rested it in my palm, but I found myself unable to move or breathe or think at the creak of the top lifting. I allowed my eyes to lower to its contents, and I pinched my lips together at the sight of the simple, solider ring settled inside, simple, yet so beautiful and perfect. I really do want to take you with me wherever I go after this. I want to come home to you every single day, to never spend another night without you beside me. But I'd also like to share our first home together with you as your husband, and never have to be without you, ever. When I come back in August, I want to marry you, Isabella Swan. I released a shaky breath and closed my eyes, unable to believe what I had just heard from Edward's lips. While most people our age were thinking about college applications and summer jobs, and hell, just the next weekend, we were sitting there contemplating the rest of our lives. I knew that someday, I wanted to marry Edward and be with him forever. But the vision of the ring that resided in the palm of my hand at that very moment reflected back at me from behind my lids, and I heard my logical brain tell me that I was only 17. I still had my entire future ahead of me, and my father agreed to this. Is that why he took off so quick tonight? Edward's hands came to rest on my knees as he lowered to the floor, kneeling in front of me as I opened my eyes to look at him. I would never go against his wishes and do this without his consent. And I know that a year ago, I said we were too young for this, but I can't imagine even another year will make me love you more, or be any more ready to dedicate my life to you. But if you need some time to think about it. When he paused and didn't continue, I took a moment to look down at the ring again, and ponder everything it represented. Would another year really make any difference? Society would probably say yes, it could make all the difference in the world. But society probably wouldn't agree with nearly every aspect of my life anyway. I was accelerating through high school a full year early and in a long-distance relationship at a very young age with the first guy I'd ever felt any kind of commitment to. I hadn't dated much to see what else was out there. I didn't take much interest in normal teenage things, exploring my options. I'd never felt inclined to do any of those things. I knew what I wanted with my whole heart, and it all resided in the man right in front of me. There was nothing that I could accomplish in my life without him by my side through it. That wouldn't be just as possible with him there, and I'd be happy as well. I planned on spending the rest of my life with him regardless, so what was the difference if we got married in August or years from then? I don't need to think about it, I whispered, bringing my eyes up to meet his again, and watching him search mine for a moment before smiling at him. I want to marry you, Edward. Edward exhaled heavily and his face fell to my lap, his hands resting on my thighs. Really? He murmured against my jeans. I brought my fingers to run gently through his hair, but his head never rose. Did you really think I was gonna say no? Is that why you've been acting so weird? His face finally lifted to look at me again and shook his head. I didn't think. I was petrified. Even your father's consent wasn't a guarantee that you'd say yes. And I didn't know how you'd feel tomorrow. And why we needed to take separate cars tonight? That wasn't a complete fabrication. I honestly didn't want to subject you to any more of my mother's issues if you did decide to see me tomorrow, but I couldn't exactly give myself a pep talk with you right beside me either, he replied with a shy smile. Oh, is that what you were doing? I couldn't help but giggle at the memory of earlier that evening. Now knowing what I was observing, it was a little humorous. Edward rolled his eyes in frustration and I placed my hand on his face, bringing his gaze to mine. I love you so much, and I can't wait till I can become your wife. With a smile, Edward took the ring from inside the box and slid it onto my finger. He gazed at it in its place for a moment before gazing into my eyes again and wrapping his arms around my waist. I love you too, Bella, always and forever, he whispered, sealing my lips with his, and I couldn't hold him tight enough. He was mine, and he would be mine forever. I tried forcing myself to sleep after returning home from Bella's, but my mind continued to race all night. Any excitement I should have been feeling after just becoming engaged to the girl I loved fell to the background when I heard my parents speaking in rough, hushed voices in the kitchen as soon as I walked in the door. Will you please just calm down and come to bed? It's getting late, my father said in an exasperated tone. No, I'm going to wait up for Edward to come home, my mother replied, her voice sounding equally as tense. He's a grown man, dear. He doesn't need his mother burning the midnight oil waiting for him, he sighed, and I quietly closed the door behind me. I knew I shouldn't have been eavesdropping on my parents' conversation, but I hadn't heard them speak to each other in such a way since my enlistment, and even that was mild compared to what I was hearing at that moment, and I couldn't comprehend why they would be. I don't care how old he is, Carlisle. He is still my son, and I will do whatever I damn well please when it comes to him, she hissed with such venom, it caused my blood to feel like ice coursing through my veins. Why are you behaving this way? You knew he was bound to grow up someday. Why don't you get it? The only consolation to that has been ripped away from under my feet, my mother exclaimed, now with evident tears in her voice. This was supposed to be our time. The boys are grown, the army is behind us. I was supposed to get my husband back. We were supposed to grow old together, play with our grandchildren, everything we've been waiting for. And now, we won't even get that. This isn't a death sentence, my father said softly, and I stood frozen in fear in the hallway. They caught it early and the prognosis is good. It's cancer, Carlisle. I don't need to be a doctor to know that there are no guarantees with that, my mother yelled, and I fell back with a thump against the wall, bile rising in my throat. I didn't need for them to clarify, the last few days made it all too clear. His demeanor, the tired, drawn appearance, the heightened tension in my mother. My strong, resilient father, my hero, had cancer. Son, his voice sounded from a few feet away from me, and I slowly lifted my eyes to look at him, shaking my head. Edward, let's talk about this. No, just no, I replied, backing away and heading for the stairs with tears burning in my eyes. I can't. I ran as fast as my legs would carry me to my room, slamming the door behind me and collapsing on my bed, where I still laid hours later. Anger and disbelief coursed through me in equal measure, causing silent cries to escape my chest. Why is this happening? I kept asking myself over and over, pounding my fists into the mattress beneath me. My father couldn't have cancer, he just couldn't. As much as I loved my mother, my dad was my pillar of strength, my backbone. All I'd ever wanted to be was him, and to have him there to watch with pride as each rank and achievement came to fruition. To be present the day I got married and eventually welcomed my first child into the world. Not this, never this. After a sleepless night, I finally rose and made my way downstairs. The smell of brewing coffee assaulted my senses, and before I could move to return to my room, I heard my father's voice calling from the kitchen. Edward, please come here. I sighed heavily and swallowed hard, my entire body rigid as I made the hesitant steps down the hall until I reached the doorway. My father was seated on one of the stools at the island, and reached over to pull out the one beside him, gesturing for me to join him. I stood still, folding my arms over my chest. I wasn't sure I was ready for what was to come, but it appeared I had no choice. Does Emmett know? My father leaned forward on his elbows on the counter and slowly nodded. Yes, your brother knows. But you hid it from me, I said tensely, my gaze locked on him as his shoulders fell slightly. What? I'm not grown enough for that. "Son, please come sit down," my father pleaded in a tired voice, and I crossed the kitchen to the coffee pot. It had been a while since I indulged in the bitter liquid, but with no sleep under my belt, I knew I'd need it. Without bothering with milk or sugar, I took the cup and settled onto the stool across from him instead, waiting for him to speak. "Listen, I know you're upset." "Upset? Why would I be upset? I only just found out that my father is dying, and didn't feel that I had the need to know, or maybe that I'm man enough to serve my country, but not enough to handle this," I growled, my anger returning in full force. "I knew it. I knew something was wrong, but you told me not to worry about it. Edward, first of all, I'm not dying. It's very early on, and people come back from far worse," my father replied calmly, meeting my gaze with his ever-gentle blue eyes. "I didn't want you worrying over nothing for your holidays." "This isn't nothing, Dad. Mom was right. This is cancer. There are no guarantees. People also die from far less, as well," I answered through clenched teeth, my hand gripping my mug in a vice-like hold. "Only when they give up, and I am far from that. I'm going to fight this, and that's more than half the battle right there," he replied, resting his hand on my arm. I shrugged off his hand, realizing what he was trying to do. "I'm not one of your patients. I don't need that false hope crap," I said after a moment, my voice lowering minimally as my eyes fell to the counter. "You still should have told me." "I know, and I'm sorry. I was just waiting for a better time," he replied and held up his hand as I looked back up to him with a clenched jaw. "I was going to tell you long before you left. I just didn't want to ruin your Christmas or your proposal to your girlfriend." "Well, Christmas has been ruined anyway, and now, I can't even focus on the fact that my girlfriend said yes," I said in an anguished voice, releasing my cup to bring my hands to either side of my head, folding my fingers behind my neck. "That is still wonderful news, son," he replied, and with my eyes closed, I transported my mind to how that moment should have been. My father, strong and healthy, embracing me at the announcement, maybe even making a half-hearted remark about how young we were, but supportive all the same. But I couldn't hide forever in the childish imaginings, and I opened my eyes again to look at him. "I'm going to be fine. I'm having surgery a few days after you head back to Maryland, and I expect to have a near-clean bill of health by summer when you return again." "That's a little too optimistic there, Dad," I said in a slightly sarcastic tone, my forehead creasing with my words. "Where is it?" "Prostate," he replied simply, and I leaned harshly against the low back of the stool. "Fuck, Dad." I exhaled heavily, my eyes rolling back as they began to burn again. "Edward, you may be an adult, but watch your language," he admonished me. "Sorry, sir," I replied obediently, scrubbing my hands over my face. "It's just prostate? The tumor is small and local. As far as we can tell, it hasn't spread anywhere. It was sheer chance that they found it at all. I went to the doctor for my kidney stones acting up again," he explained slowly, tenting his fingers in front of him on the counter. "The survival rate is very high in cases like mine. Don't worry yourself until there's something to worry about, and that's not now. I have no intention of going anywhere and leaving my wife and boys." I nodded non-committally, my voice lodged in my throat. I wished I could feel the confidence echoed in his words, but I couldn't shake the instant stigma attached to the term cancer, pain and suffering. My father, gaunt and pale, losing all his hair to the treatments, death mourning, the utter devastation to my entire family. My chest was tight, and my hands shook under the strain of my thoughts, and from pure exhaustion. "Edward, I've never lied to you, or shielded you from anything, even as a boy, and I've never made a promise to you that I didn't feel with absolute certainty that I would be able to keep. You know that. I've got a lot more fight left in me than this is going to take, and I will be here when you marry that beautiful girl of yours, and long after," my father said in a reassuring tone, and I wanted so badly to believe him wholeheartedly, every word. But instead, I rested my forehead on my arms, folded on the table. "You should go get some rest, son. You're exhausted." "No, I'm fine. I'm just going to take a shower and head over to see Bella," I replied, shaking my head as it rose and taking a sip of the lukewarm coffee in front of me. I needed her far more than sleep. "All right, just be careful and please, bring her by later. I'd like to hug and congratulate my future daughter-in-law," my father said with a genuine smile, standing up and resting his hand on my shoulder. "I'm very happy for you both." I rose and wrapped my arms around him, uncaring of the fact that I felt about 10 years old again with the motion. "I love you, Dad." I felt his embrace secure around me gently, and he patted my back. "I love you too, Edward, always have and will." Wait, what did you say? Bella gasped as she shakily lowered to the couch beside me after I told her the news, tears immediately welling in her eyes. But that's impossible. Your dad is so healthy. He doesn't look sick at all. I rubbed my eyes with the heels of my palms until I gave in and lowered my head to her lap, finally succumbing to the sob I'd been restraining all night. He says it's early and insists he'll be fine. But God, Bella, what if he's not? I can't lose my dad. I heard her breathe out slowly and hugged my arm around her legs as she gently stroked my hair with her fingertips. With anyone else, I would have felt like a complete idiot, crying as I was into the fabric of her jeans and allowing myself to be completely vulnerable. There was also the twinge of guilt running through me for ruining what should have been one of the happiest days of our lives. It was Christmas, we were together, and we'd been engaged for less than 24 hours. And instead, I was sobbing into her lap like a child, desperate for the comfort only she could give me. I'm sorry, baby, I'm so sorry, I cried, pressing my lips to her denim-clad thigh. I just couldn't break down in front of him. I couldn't do that. It's okay, Edward, I understand, Bella replied softly, her hand moving to my back and rubbing slow circles against it. And call me an optimist, but maybe things really will be okay. He's a doctor, so he would know his odds better than the average person. He's a strong man and you said they caught it early, right? And he's got excellent medical care at his disposal. I sighed and rose from her lap, leaning back against the couch. But what if he's not? And he dies and I'm thousands of miles away. Hell, just the surgery alone runs just as many risks as any other. Baby, listen to me, Bella said firmly, and I looked at her as she moved to settle onto my lap. I love your dad nearly as much as I love mine, and I can't even begin to imagine how I would feel if this happened to my own father, though I'm pretty sure I'd be just as scared as you are. I am scared right now, but Carlisle Cullen is the last man in the world I could ever see giving up at even a worse obstacle than this, and you shouldn't either. Fearing the worst isn't going to help at all, Edward. I slid my arms around her waist and pressed my face to her chest, listening to the low thrum of her pounding heart, and allowing it to calm me a little. I held her tight as what felt like a million thoughts ran through my mind simultaneously. I knew she was right. I couldn't give up, but with my father's diagnosis came a slew of fresh realizations. While I hadn't understood my mother's behavior before, I did at that moment with startling clarity. For more than 25 years, she had been everything an army wife should be, patient and understanding, married with 2 children, and never complaining when, at times, she was raising us on her own, while our father was deployed or on other army business. She had been waiting and praying for all those years to have her husband home and safe, and finally begin her life with him. And suddenly, she was struck with the reality that it might not ever happen. I could understand how it would be difficult to be optimistic when it seemed as if the world was crashing down around her. Both her children had grown and begun their own lives, and the possibility of her husband dying and leaving her completely alone was more real than any battlefield he'd ever faced. There was never a doubt in my mind how much my father loved my mother, and vice versa. But suddenly, my future with Bella reflected in my parents flashed before me, and I didn't like what I saw. Even if I didn't have plans to become a career officer like my father anymore, there were never any guarantees in this world, and I vowed that I wouldn't make my parents' mistake. I'd never take Bella for granted or make her feel that she was anything less than a priority in my life. If we ever had kids, she wouldn't be a married, single parent, and if I died tomorrow, she would know exactly how much I loved her and how important she was to me. I would tell her and show her in any way I could, every single day for the rest of my life. Thank you, Bella, I murmured, gripping the back of her shirt tightly in my fingers. You really are the best thing to ever walk into my crazy life. You know that, right? Bella's lips pressed to the top of my head and I could almost feel her body flush in response to my words as her embrace tightened around me. I love you, Edward. Love you too, I barely managed to mumble before my body went lax in her arms, and I finally fell asleep there against her. I wasn't sure how long I'd been out when I woke on the couch, lying flat with a blanket over me, and Bella nowhere in sight. I rose to sit, my body still trembling with exhaustion, but I didn't want to sleep anymore, and waste another second I had with her. Bella, I called out, standing slowly from the couch. In the kitchen, she replied, her voice carrying down the hall, and I followed the sound. However, I stopped abruptly in the doorway when I spotted Alice sitting at the table, car seat at her feet and her arms folded over her chest. I fought a smile at the severe look on her face, and quickly made my way over to Bella, kissing her cheek and then crouching down in front of my goddaughter. Good morning, sweet girl. Afternoon is more like it, Alice chimed in with her foot bouncing impatiently as I lifted Sarah Lynn into my arms. And don't think you're hiding behind my daughter. How could you not tell me you were planning to propose to my best friend last night? I told Jasper, I replied, and a laugh finally escaped me as she gasped with her mouth wide open. And we both knew that you couldn't keep a secret. Oh, that is so not true, Alice exclaimed, and after the heaviness of the morning and the night before, it felt good to be able to have a light-hearted banter with her. I'm an excellent secret keeper. Both Bella and I looked at her with eyebrows raised sarcastically, and Alice pouted with a huff. I stood with the baby in my arms and took the seat on the other side of Bella, focusing on the tiny fingers that stretched out and then curled back into a fist as I lightly traced the back of her hand. Sarah Lynn gazed up at me, gurgling, while the girls resumed the conversation they'd obviously been having before I interrupted. Honestly, Bella, how is a wedding supposed to come together in the matter of 8 months? Alice asked with the hint of a whine in her voice. Very easily. People do it all the time. We could even elope if I thought my father would give his consent, since I'm only 17, Bella replied, and I was unable to discern if she was serious or not by her expression, until she broke into a laugh at her father's not a chance Isabella. Graduation first, echoing from down the hall as he came down the stairs to sit in the living room. And Edward wouldn't dare do something like that. If Charlie didn't kill him, his brother and best friend would, Alice added, her gaze moving to me with narrowed eyes. No, ma'am, I answered with a smirk. But Bella, seriously, Alice began, turning her attention back to my fiancé. Fiancé? God, I love the sound of that. You're still going to be 17 in August anyway, so why the rush? A few more months would give us so many more options to work with. Bella stiffened slightly, reaching for her glass of water in front of her and taking a sip. That's not really a luxury we have, Alice. Edward is in the army, and we both want to be married before he gets his assignment, and that could be anywhere. Which leaves us with August when he comes back from 8. Besides, I'm not one of those girls who's been planning and envisioning her perfect wedding since I was a kid. I never did the pillowcase veil or pretend weddings in my bedroom. I didn't even think I'd ever want to get married before Edward and I got together, quite honestly. So the how and when don't matter to me at all. I just want to be with him. Alice was surprisingly silent following Bella's rant, and I glanced over to the love of my life to find her roughly brushing away a tear that had fallen down her cheek. I'm sorry, Bella. I didn't mean. I know, Bella whispered back to Alice with her eyes lowered to her lap. I just really don't want anything extravagant. Things like that aren't important to me. It's just a bunch of unnecessary things, all for the same desired result. To marry Edward, I'd be happier walking down the aisle in jeans and sneakers than all that. As long as our family and friends are there, that's all that really matters. Well, aside from the jeans and sneakers thing, which will never happen, Alice replied with a small smile. I think that sounds amazing and completely you. And August will still be warm enough to even have it outside. In Washington, Alice, I piped in finally, we have more likelihood of being rained out than a chance at a dry day. A smile, however small, returned to Bella's lips, and her hand came to rest on my leg. But we still have plenty of time to figure all this out. We just got engaged last night, Alice. So, we already had Rose's wedding half planned by this point when she got engaged to Emmett, Alice quipped with an arched eyebrow. We really just want to enjoy our time together right now, before I have to go back. I replied and felt Bella's fingers gently squeeze my knee. And we're going to my parents' house for dinner tonight. Bella's head shot up and turned toward me quickly, her eyes wide with surprise. We are? But I thought, change in plans. My father wants to see his future daughter-in-law, I said as she trailed off, kissing her temple and attempting to block out the heaviness weighing in around us again, and to quell her confusion. My house was the last place I'd wanted to be that night when we'd last spoken of it the previous evening, and I hadn't had the chance that morning to inform her otherwise. And your mom? Bella asked with questioning eyes, seemingly forgetting that we weren't alone in the room for a moment. It will be fine, I promise, I replied reassuringly. Wait, what's up with your mom? I thought she loved Bella, Alice inquired, reminding us of her presence. I looked to Bella, who shook her head subtly, telling me without words that she hadn't divulged any information to Alice concerning my father. And in that particular moment, I was eternally grateful for it. I turned my attention back to Alice and offered a forced smile. She was just a little taken by surprise with the engagement. Thinks we're a bit young for that. Alice looked between us with a disbelieving expression, but thankfully let it go. Okay, well, I was just stopping by to wish Charlie and Bella a Merry Christmas, and really should be heading over to Grandma and Grandpa Whitlock's with their grandbaby. First Christmas and all. They're kinda making a big deal of it. I nodded and leaned down to kiss Sarah Lynn's forehead before she was lifted from my arms by her mother, asking Alice to give the Whitlocks my regards and a promise to visit them before I left. With a farewell to Chief Swan, Alice was out the door, and Bella immediately turned to me. Your parents' house? Really? I stepped toward her and wrapped my arms around her shoulders, kissing her hair. It will be fine, baby, and if it's not, we'll leave. Okay, but I'm driving, she replied, and my forehead creased. You're still exhausted, if the snores rumbling my entire house a little while ago are any indication. I don't snore, I called out to her as she pulled away from me and headed for the stairs. You do, too, she practically sang as she disappeared up to her room. Like a train, Chief Swan added softly from his recliner with a chuckle, and I turned to look at him, meeting his sympathetic gaze. Well, he knows, I thought to myself with a heavy sigh. Bella's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as we pulled to a stop in front of the house, her lips pressed into a thin line, and moisture brimming her eyes. I reached over to trace along her arm lightly, and then loosened her hold, gliding my fingers between hers, and bringing them to my lips to brush a kiss against my knuckles. Baby, we don't have to go in there if you're not ready to, I said softly, and she turned her gaze to me. No, I'm fine, she replied with a small smile, and I raised my eyebrow at her. Really, Edward, I'm okay, are you? I sat silently for a moment, thoroughly pondering that. However, it didn't take long for me to have my answer, and then slowly nodded my head, squeezing her hand gently. Yeah, I am. All right, then let's go, she said, nodding her head toward the car door. Okay, I whispered, leaning over to give her a gentle kiss, and releasing her hand to step out of the car. Bella met me at the front and slid her arm around my waist as we made our way to the door, immediately walking into the house to find my parents standing there, waiting for us. She released me once again and walked toward them, wrapping my father tightly in her embrace. Congratulations, Bella, he murmured against her hair as he rested his cheek against the top of her head. Yes, congratulations. We are so thrilled to have you become part of the family, my mother added from beside them, pressed close to my father's side, and her gaze met mine, mouthing I'm sorry. Bella opened her eyes to look at her, and brought one of her arms to wrap around my mother as well. Thank you, both of you. As I stood watching my fiancé being engulfed in my parents' arms, I found myself relaxing somewhat, despite all that had transpired in the last few days. For the first time in weeks, it really seemed as if things might actually be okay. Even though I would be a few thousand miles away very shortly, I knew that everyone I cared about would be together, and no matter what the outcome of my father's illness, both my parents would have an added support system in Bella. Next episode's here.